And when you think it's over...
Hi, I'm Perri Nemiroff.
Hey there, my name's Chauncey K. Robinson.
Hey, my name is Tim Cogshell.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Wixson.
And I am a Tomato Meter approved critic. And I am in my happy place right now because I get to talk horror.
We are watching horror movies, hopefully many that I like.
My background with horror movies, it's pretty much a lifelong obsession of mine.
I love horror movies. I'm usually someone who likes more empowering horror movies, ones that aren't as nihilistic, because I've always seen horror movies as a reflection of society.
I think for most horror fans, I think our love for the genre comes from just sort of this idea of otherness, whether it's exploring other creatures or other worlds, or for some of us who maybe don't feel like we fit in with the quote unquote norm of society, that this gives us an outlet.
I absolutely love all genres. I'll watch any movie, but there is no denying the fact that horror is number one in my heart. I love the entertainment value and the thrill of seeing these stories unfold on the big screen. I love the fact that genre storytelling can tackle really difficult human truths in ways that other genres can't. And then on top of that, there is nothing better than horror movie magic. I am fascinated by how these films are crafted.
I used to love horror movies, mostly, and then I came to love horror movies less. A lot of this just has to do with the generation that I'm from. I'm from that generation of horror movie fans from really the beginning of horror movies. When horror movies sort of changed, particularly around the early 2000s, I become a little bit less enamored of them. Movies like Saw and whatnot that are really more about the gore, about the buzz kill, if you will. I like those a little bit less, but nevertheless, there are many, many, many contemporary horror films that I really, really love. Nick Cage was in 2 films this past year that I thoroughly enjoyed. One was Dream Scenario, which was a horror film in a particular kind of way, sort of a psychological horror film that has a whole lot to do with society. The other one, also a Nick Cage film called Long Legs, with a really, really a great performance by Blair Underwood. But mostly, it's Nick Cage disappearing into that character, Long Legs.
My favorite horror movie of 2024, it's What's Inside. I think it is an absolutely brilliant and super ambitious body swap horror movie that is so expertly executed by a first-time feature filmmaker. Mark my words, Greg Jardin is going places.
I really enjoyed Alien Romulus, and I loved Maxine. I am such a biased person when it comes to 80s aesthetic, and I just love the dark humor.
My favorite horror movie of 2024 so far has to be Coralie Fairger's The Substance. I didn't know that I was going to be giddy during the last 10 minutes of the movie, where I was practically ready to jump out of my seat by just watching everything unfolding.
I'm so curious to see what these are.
Alien, man, Ridley Scott's Alien in 1979. It's a groundbreaking film for a whole bunch of different reasons. For one thing, what was the nature of the film? In 1979, we didn't really know that we were going to see a horror film. In space, no one can hear you scream. We knew it was going to be some sort of a science fiction thriller, and that's the way that film is set up. And then it slowly creeps into being this extremely effective horror movie. There are a number of absolutely fantastic scenes in Alien, but the one that sticks with me to this day is the chest-bursting scene. Everybody knows this scene. Everybody remembers the big moment in the scene. It's just a tremendous feat of editing and performance and writing. All of the actors in that scene play the moments as though they've never seen them before, as though they're first take moments. Everybody is fully engaged. It's a really, really striking scene. It works every single time. It works even if you've seen it before. It always works. This is what I mean about this scene. It's such an ordinary scene. It begins with these space truckers just chit-chatting.
Maybe rubbing bacon.
That's it. Selling coconuts and pineapples.
We have no sense at all that anything extraordinary is gonna happen until the camera starts to creep just a little bit.
I'm eating birch fruit and this, but then I'm tasting better, you know what I'm saying?
This scene was always sad to me. Because you just know something bad is happening, but it's so chill.
It's just chit-chat. It's nothing super important to the actual story or the mythos of Alien. And yet, in this moment, John Hurt is just, you're like, oh, okay.
And now it begins.
The food ain't that bad, baby.
Eat your patrol.
And then we start to get our coverage of the scene, which is fantastic. As the scene begins, everyone is engaged in this totally natural behavior. The behavior, when you don't know what's going on, he's trying to get that spoon in his mouth so he won't bite his tongue off.
Nothing about this feels super staged or like rehearsed. It's just like, oh, this is an oh crap moment.
And it goes up and up and up, and we think the scene is going to be over. And we think it's over. But it's not over.
And what I heard is that they filmed that and didn't tell the rest of the actors.
Here it comes, and you're like, wait, what?
And it starts again.
Oh, God.
But they're like, what?
And we think the scene is over.
Oh, no. Oh!
Don't touch it! Don't touch it!
Now that scene, it's funny. In the years since that scene, it's become the butt of jokes in Saturday Night Live sketches and all kinds of films and parodies and whatnot. But the reality is that chest bursting scene is an extremely effective scene today, tomorrow, and forever. And the reason why it gets parodied is because it's so incredibly effective.
Very powerful scene. It's iconic.
I literally just sat here with like the biggest grin on my face while the most horrific thing just happened to someone. Oh, I see.
I think the reason that this scene in New Nightmare is so powerful is because it made me realize that Freddy could actually still be scary. You know, because we've gone through several different movies that sort of turned him into an MTV icon. He's, you know, making quips. He's got a TV show for 2 seasons that he's just being kind of goofy on. I didn't know that I could be scared of Freddy Krueger anymore, especially like as a teenager where, you know, I didn't have sort of the childhood fears that I had anymore. And I think this sequence in New Nightmare particularly is just such a really fantastic moment where it shows you how Wes was interested in turning Freddy Krueger into something more than just a pop culture icon, where he was this icon of storytelling, regardless of what the medium was, and that he sort of embodied evil in ways we just had never expected.
I think it's one of the absolute best of the Nightmare on Elm Street series.
So this is probably my favorite sequence in all of New Nightmare. There's a lot of great sequences, but for me, this is a huge turning point in the film, but I also think in 90s horror as well. As much love as Scream gets, and I will always give Scream love, for me, New Nightmare was sort of the first horror movie that really did kind of change expectations about what meta was and how you could sort of blend fiction and reality in ways you weren't expecting. And that's why I'll always go to bat for New Nightmare.
What's going on, Heather? What in the world happened?
I know how Chase really died.
What do you mean?
Fred Krueger did it.
Yeah, sure.
We still think we're playing in the reality of Heather Langenkamp's world, and yet there's all these little touches where you're like, wait, that moment when John Saxon looks at her, he's not looking at her like John Saxon, he's looking at her like Lieutenant Donald Thompson, his character from the original Nightmare on Elm Street and Nightmare 3.
I'll be right back.
And of course, Freddy's going to come through the bed, an homage, of course, to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where Nancy watches Freddy get absorbed into her mom's bed.
The great thing about really all of the Wes Craven films, this one included, is that Wes was still from the era of the practical effects.
You think it's Heather and John Saxon talking, and yet it's really such a beautiful, subtle thing when the costumes change there, where now it's father and daughter. And Freddy's becoming fully realized and actualized into this reality.
Robert Englund. You know, the guy who plays Freddy.
Freddy who?
Freddy Krueger.
And she even talks about Freddy as like Robert Englund, and you're just like, wait, I don't know what's happening here. And that's like an incredible shot right there.
Start losing it like your mother did. I love you, sweetheart.
This is the key line to all of this.
I love you too, Daddy.
When she says daddy, you're like, okay, she's in, game is on, Freddy's coming. And I love the way he's shot here too. It's so imposing and scary. It was probably the first time I felt Freddy was scary again.
Nosferatu reference.
It is an homage to Nosferatu, the original, with the shadow, and just showing the iconic status of Freddy Krueger, that no matter what,
And there it is.
Freddy was always going to be an icon.
Now get yourself some rest.
And then just revealing that Heather's now in the pajamas that her character is wearing from the original Nightmare. And having to step up in ways that, like, she used to do, like, you know, for a paycheck, and now she has to do for quote unquote for real. It's so brilliant. And probably, you know, one of the best moments in 90s horror ever.
I just want to watch the whole movie.
Great movie.
I think the reason that this scene in New Nightmare is so powerful is because, again, it was so unusual at that time. It's just such a beautiful moment. There's some people who are like, oh, we should have had more Nightmare on Elm Street movies. For me, honestly, New Nightmare was the perfect bookend to A Nightmare on Elm Street because it made Freddy become sort of this facet of evil in ways you just never expect from a character in a movie.
People didn't appreciate this film when it came out, right? Wes Craven was doing meta, and this was before he got to do it again with Scream, and people appreciated it better, but he did meta in such a cool way that kept it scary, that wasn't just like joke, joke, joke. What Wes Craven was able to do with New Nightmare was reestablish the fear, reestablish the darkness of Freddy with this in a very self-aware way of understanding how in the Hollywood machine or whatnot that he kind of became a gimmick. And it's like, this character should not be a gimmick. He's dangerous.
I think New Nightmare is one of the most brilliant horror sequels ever made. And still, I am utterly shocked that more iconic horror franchises, in particular slasher franchises, have not tried to recreate this formula within their own world.
Oh, I love this film.
One of my fave John Carpenter movies. I think the reason why I love In the Mouth of Madness is because it blurs this line between the question of fiction reflecting life and life reflecting fiction, and the question of, do we have any kind of control over ourselves and our fate? And I think that's something that many of us go through, whether you love horror or not, where you're kind of like, do I have control over my life? Or is this just something that happens? And just like our main character in the end watches himself, at this point, it's kind of like, did any of this matter, or was I always going to end up here?
I have not rewatched this in forever.
A John Carpenter film that was not a big hit at the time, but real horror films, real horror fans really love this film.
The finale of In the Mouth of Madness, it's one of those moments where I was like, I thought I knew who John Carpenter was as a director, and then I was like, no, I guess I didn't know who John Carpenter was as a director at all, because it's so cool and so unexpected. And also, Sam Neill, who's a guy who like everybody would come to know and love because of Jurassic Park, just really kind of gives his all in this.
It's like random, but keeping that horror vibe. I don't think we even ever find out who that was.
Continue this emergency broadcast as long as we can hold out here. The city is almost completely deserted now. There are only a few stragglers left on the streets. No emergency services. The fires continue.
It's always a great theme in any horror film, this film, any horror film, when we're presented with the notion of crazy, a character who's supposed to be detached from reality. And we work our way back and forth in the film, who's crazy, who's not crazy, who's crazy, who's not crazy. And when we can land in a spot where the crazy guy isn't crazy, the crazy guy is sane, the crazy character got it right, if you can land in that spot and it really works, it's outstanding.
In the West Coast last night. So it's impossible at this time to know how many unaffected people are left. If for any reason you are one of us who hasn't become infected,
now the character is about to go into a movie of his own life. It's this like layer upon layer where you're like, no, how can you even do this?
And this is like part of the absurdity. Like in the midst of all this, he's hearing all that and he still takes time to go watch a film. Because why not, right? It's the end of the world.
I love that he stops to get the popcorn. That's just...
You hear me? I'm not insane!
Relax, buddy.
This is not a Sutter Kane story. This is not reality. Not reality. Not reality.
This is reality.
Yeah, that's reality. Not reality. Reality.
Yep.
Why is laughing so scary?
I love that.
Makes me so uncomfortable.
Just amazing. Because it's like the culmination of like everything he went through. And he was like, he had swagger in the beginning and all this other stuff. And he just gets to a point where it's like, oh, the joke's on me. And I'm laughing at myself in my reality.
Oh, okay.
Whenever we think about classic horror and specifically slasher franchises that are like top tier, the best of the best, we'll name drop things like Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, Halloween, and I think all of those are very deserving. But I also think we need to make it more commonplace that Final Destination is in that category as well. I think it is one of the most brilliant horror franchise concepts ever, and it is so well done in that first movie. I'll never forget seeing that movie for the first time and being utterly fascinated by Death's design and how incredibly creative you could get with that concept. Essentially, the kill scene creative opportunities are endless with that particular concept. So good. So good. She's trying to be responsible and having tea. And that does her in.
That's the fun of the Final Destination films, is that they find these incredibly ridiculously clever ways to make these little things that just seem so innocuous become so deadly.
Don't mix the hot and cold.
And we see that like here with like the mug splitting and you're like, okay, well how can that possibly kill it?
Oh, it starts, yeah. I always love how Death in the Final Destination series just goes through elaborate, like, mousetrap kind of ways to kill people.
The use of that John Denver song in this, too, is utter perfection. There's nothing that gives me more anxiety than someone who has liquid near their computer.
This is just a brilliant concept. for a film. The notion that you are being stalked by death, and that no matter what you do, death will win.
Final Destination also doesn't get the credit it deserves for its score. I think it's got one of the best horror themes of all time.
And there it is. Do not ask for whom the bell tolls for you. This film could have ended when she took the shot in the neck from the computer, but nah, we're gonna take this baby all the way up, and when you think it's over,
Of course.
this is unfortunate.
It's a slasher attack with no physical slasher.
One of the reasons why that scene works so great is because the scene takes itself seriously. It could play as comedy. This could play as comedy, but the scene takes itself seriously, so we take it seriously. It's crazy as it is, we buy it.
Okay. Oh God,
Oh, jeez. Of course he did.
Yeah, bad move, kid. Bad move. What are you gonna do?
Hey, Alex.
Oh my God, I completely forgotten that he was in this movie. I had completely forgotten that he was in this movie. Perfect last line of dialogue. Dude. Good. Great scene.
That scene is such a perfect scene.
I mean, I liked the first one. It was solid. But, I mean, some of the stuff was kind of ridiculous. And that's fine.
The whole thing is just a string of accidents that perhaps it isn't realistic for all of them to happen one after the other, but there are so many little pieces to this that could happen in your everyday life. It's part of the reason why everybody now, because of Final Destination 2, sees a truck with logs and thinks about that. If I carry a drink near my computer, if I hear the John Denver song, I could go on and on. It brings me right back to this scene. This particular moment is also absolutely packed to the brim with symbolism and fun Easter eggs. In particular, the thing that catches my eye every time I rewatch this scene is the fact that the knife was in our faces the entire time. And it's not even just a quick glimpse. They keep cutting back to the knife imagery and it basically hanging right above her. And then sure enough, that's what happens in the end. This time of year, I always think a whole lot about why I love horror so much. And this might seem like weird phrasing to apply to such a scary genre, but there's something about horror movies that I find comforting.
The horror movies of my youth were a cathartic sort of release. They allowed you to pour all of your fears, all of the things that we dread into the movie.
Probably more than any other genre, it really is like this mirror that we hold up to society. You know, we fill these stories with creatures and monsters and fears and all sorts of dastardly things, and yet there's a lot of truth in horror that I think becomes really reflective of the world at large in ways that we don't expect.
There's so many themes that can be explored in horror, whether it's political, the idea of social situations. And I think horror is always able to kind of intertwine that in a way where you can enjoy the story for itself, but then you can also understand the themes that are happening in it.
This genre just fills me up due to the creativity that's required to make it happen. You could look at some of the most elaborate body horror scenes or even the simplest insert and just really appreciate how the big and small are so necessary in order to pull these scare scenes off.
There's a little bit for everybody in there. Like, there's so many subgenres of horror. If you're not really into the body horror gore, you can watch a really cool ghost story that hardly has any blood or anything in it and just tells like a great story that like harkens back to like Edgar Allan Poe vibes.
The possibilities are endless, and I am a true believer that there is a horror movie out there for everyone.
What they do is they allow whatever's scaring us in our everyday life to pale in comparison to an alien bursting from your chest and running across the room. Watch a horror movie, and it will make your Tuesday.